Hi guys, how are you doing? For today's read aloud, which is chapter 7, it's the second part of chapter 7. I would like you again to grab paper and pencil and take notes, okay? You can pause this video and do that if you want. So last video I was talking about the fact that the hunters, they found some droppings and clumps of small black pellets and that they thought belonged to ibex. So if you don't know, ibex, we spell I-B-E-X, and ibex is a type of a mountain goat. It's like a wild goat. It's a mountain goat with long curved horns. This is an ibex. So I'm going to continue that conversation, that part of chapter 7. Further on, Otak spotted the print of a cloven hoof in some damp moss. The men were pleased with him. The droppings were everywhere. Clearly, a large group was grazing here. The men began to talk of a hunt. Maroo felt saliva run in her mouth at the thought of meat. So can you imagine? She was hungry. But when they returned to the campfire, Old Mother was uneasy. 2 men were not enough to hunt ibex, she said, and Sylvie was too far ahead now to be called. And an ibex is really big, so imagine 2 men are not enough to hunt it. Vorka began to look doubtful, but Areg laughed away his fears. They were hungry for meat, and the signs of ibex were rich on the ground. Perhaps the rock spirit was grateful for their gift and had brought the ibex to them? Who knows? It's unwise, said Old Mother, to hunt large game when the group is so small. So Old Mother was not very comfortable about this idea. But Maroo could see that the thought of meat tempted her, and perhaps Areg was right and the rock spirit intended it. At last she agreed. Areg was glad. He pretended to be an ibex, and butted Nimai, who shouted with laughter. Vorka was won over by Areg's confidence, and they made ready at once, sharpening their spears and planning how and where to trap the ibex. Otak wanted to go with them and bring Rivo, but the man said no. So I would like you to pause now and write this down, that Otak wanted to go with the man, but the man said no, okay? Pause this video and write that. Even without Rivo, they would not allow Otak to go. It was too dangerous. All Otak could do was to sit close by them and listen to their plans so that he could impress his sisters later with details of the hunt. The children watched as Areg brought out 2 horns, one filled with red stuff and the other with black. The stuff was earth mixed with fat. So now I would like you to pause this video and write down why do you think they had this thing? What do you think they would use it for? Why do you think they would use this stuff that was earth mixed with fat? Write down your answer and pause it. After you wrote down your answer, now you're going to write the real answer that is in the book. So they did this to make paste, and this paste, what they did is they dipped their fingers in that paste and they painted each other's face with a pattern of stripes and diamonds. When Areg turned and looked at Nimai out of his new strange face, she backed away and clung to Maroo. Maroo laughed, but she too was a little afraid of the changed faces. The man was Areg, and yet not only Areg, he had become an ibex. The men took up their spears and began climbing higher up the mountain. Soon they were out of sight. The camp was quiet without them. Otak found the horns of colored paste and began painting his face. The girls played quiet games, building tiny shelters with bits of bone. or rolling stones and knocking them against each other to see who could win the most. They dared not shout or laugh because when they did, the rock spirit shouted back. The children climbed around and collected some withered fruits, a basket of nuts, and a few sticks of firewood. Maroo found mushrooms growing in a grassy patch where water ran down. She gave them all to Tikek, who was always hungry now because of the baby. The baby whimpered constantly for milk, and Tikek fed him, and in between times she mended clothes, while Old Mother put a new handle on the basket. At dusk, the man had not returned. Old Mother said, "It's nothing. They will sleep out and hunt again in the morning." But Maroo sensed her anxiety. She looked at the rock wall looming up dark and strange in the fading light, and wished she had not given all the mushrooms to her mother. There was nothing to offer the spirit except dried meat, and they had little enough of that, but Old Mother took some, remade the ring of stones, and placed it inside. Then they were each given a portion to eat, and water to drink from a spring higher up the mountain. They crept under their shelter to sleep. Everyone was hungry. Maroo took the first watch, with Rivo beside her. Her stomach growled its protest as she sat chewing a hard root. Maroo was afraid. She sensed that something was wrong. The two women seemed anxious. The hunters might stay away at night, as Old Mother had said, but not when there was no man or strong woman to protect the family. So what do you think happened? Why do you think the men haven't returned? Write down your thoughts, and you can pause the video if you want to. She listened to the night, straining to hear any sound of the hunters. Perhaps they were near, in one of the little caves higher up. She heard the cry of an owl hunting, and the high piping of bats. And once she tensed in fear when she thought she heard a low, cat-like growl. Rivo stood up, ears erect, but the sound did not come again. There was no human voice. But then Areg and Vorka would not talk above a whisper, and they moved as softly as hares. The owl hooted again, and from the rock wall its voice was thrown back mockingly. Maroo crouched close to the fire for comfort and poked at it with a stick, so that a shower of sparks shot up briefly and hid the wall. She longed for her watch to end, but it was not yet time to wake or talk. So when do you think would be time for her to finish her watch? Because she's watching to make sure that no animals or nothing dangerous would come. So when do you think it would be the time to wake up her brother? So pause this video and write down the answer. What do you think? Now you're going to listen to the answer, the correct answer, and you're going to write down the correct answer also. The moon was her guide to the time. When it reached the highest point of the ridge, she was to awake him. So write down this answer, that when the moon reached the highest point of the ridge, that's when Maroo's watch finished. That's when she needed to wake him up. Tonight, the moon was newborn and gave scarcely any light. Iringadu shone brighter. Maroo was comforted by the sight of Iringadu. If the star had been hidden by cloud, she would have felt more threatened by the rock spirit. She was sure that the rock spirit was bad, even though it had brought them the ibex. The baby cried. breaking the night's stillness. Maroo heard Tikek stirring and shushing the child. Shh, 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 shh. Tikek raised herself on one elbow. Who is watching? She whispered. Maroo. The moon was still far from the highest ridge. But Tikek said, You sleep now, Maroo. I will watch and wake Otak later. How is the night? I heard an owl and bats and perhaps a lion. Eringato is bright, she added unnecessarily. She sensed Tikek's smile at that. Good, go to sleep. Maroo petted Rivo and went into the shelter and changed places with her mother. The baby was already attached to Tikek's breast and sucking with little gasps of contentment. Tikek crawled out, holding him on one arm and squatted beside the fire, and Maroo settled into her space, where the furs were warm from her body. She was soon asleep. She woke to the familiar sight of old mother fixing the bond pins in her coiled hair. The stones were heading in the fire, and Nimai was handing nuts around. You must search for them, Nimai said importantly. Maroo felt cold inside. She looked at old mother. Old mother turned around, and Maroo saw that she also was afraid. They should have returned, old mother said. We must find them today. She said no more, but dropped the hot stones into the bone bowl full of water flavored with herbs, then tipped the hot liquid into the drinking bowl and passed it first to Tikek. Tikek sipped and passed it back. Only when everyone had drunk did old mother tell Maroo to fetch a coil and twisted hide rope, and Otak to fetch his spear. Tikek and Nimai would stay behind, she said, in case the men came back. Old mother led the way up the mountain, Maroo and Otak following, and Rivo running beside them. The trail was hard to find. The hunters were skilled and left few clues, but they all began casting about, and soon Maroo found a footprint in damp moss. Rivo sniffed. He sniffed at the footprint and trotted off fast, with his nose to the ground. He has found the trail, Otak whispered. The three of them followed the dog, who ran unchecked. The trail wound a long way among the high rocks, and all about were the prints and droppings of ibex. Once, as they reached the top of a hill, there was an abrupt clatter of hooves, and they saw the white rumps of several ibex darting away. They went on, still following the dog. Rivo was some way ahead of them when he stopped. He seemed to be on the edge of a cliff. He looked back at them and barked, "Woof, woof, woof, woof." As they hurried toward him, Maroo thought she heard a human voice. She reached the Rivo and looked over the edge. What do you think she found? What do you think was the human voice? Write your opinion. You can pause if you need. The ground fell away steeply, forming a small cliff. Vorka was trapped halfway down. When he stood up, they saw that his right arm hung oddly as if it were broken. And then Maroo looked past Vorka and saw something else. Now I want you to write down what else she found. Are you ready? You're going to write that down. The huddled shape of a rag lying at the foot of the cliff. Do you think he's dead or alive? What's your guess, guys? And that's the end of chapter 7.